first, as a refresher, let's start by reminding ourselves of what blockchain is and why even as a developer in particular, we can even bother to use this emerging tech. What are some of the benefits that we're going to see? So let's start with that. And so in simplest terms, blockchain is effectively just a digital ledger technology containing a series of time-stamped, immutable records of data managed by a group of computers and is not owned by any single entity. Each block of transaction that's recorded is linked to the previous block, and hence the term blockchain. And this series of transactions are linked together using cryptography. So on this slide here, the sample transaction recorded in a digital ledger between, let's say, Alice and Bob is recorded in a network of computers, which utilizes some sort of consensus mechanism to ensure that the ledger's integrity is maintained. So for example, making sure that we avoid the double spend challenge. And so from this very basic diagram here, some of the benefits to highlight of a blockchain are the fact that it's decentralized, distributed, immutable, cryptographically secure, and effectively it's just a database that contains some of these inherent benefits. So blockchain tech offers a way for untrusted parties to reach some sort of agreement or consensus on a common digital history. And this digital history is important because digital assets and transactions could be faked or duplicated. And so by using blockchain, we try to address this problem of the double spend issue without having to have a trusted intermediary that manages that transaction process.
Yeah, so you can think about it like, a blockchain is a setup where you don't have to trust a person or a company. You just trust the technology and the protocols that the technology uses to come to agreement on things.
So let's take a quick look at why even use blockchain. And I think the current challenge in the industry is that blockchain is sort of seen as a solution looking for a problem to solve, a bit like a hammer looking for that nail to hit. And so there are some tangible benefits for using blockchain, and some of the most common ones that are highlighted are mentioned here. The key point for developers is that the goal here is to provide, some sort of hosted solution similar to what you would get with Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud, and allow the developers to focus on delivering value for their end users on their applications and not on the underlying infrastructure. And so blockchain is just another example of a hosted solution that could free up the developer to enable them to focus on delivering the end value to their users.
Yeah, and operating, infrastructure for a web app or a mobile application, anything that kind of connects people together is, that has overhead, that has operational costs. And so a blockchain can enable developers to build their apps in such a way where they don't have to operate that. And, contrary to something like AWS and Google, which are very centralized solutions, like Amazon, for example, in AWS is completely exclusively responsible for maintaining all of your infrastructure that you deploy there. Well, in a blockchain situation, unaffiliated people across the globe are all supporting the platform. So it's decentralized in that respect. So you don't have to worry about, say, in the unlikely event that Amazon goes bust or is the target of some sort of security incident, you might have trouble if you're using AWS exclusively, but if you're using a blockchain, if someone is targeting an individual within that, that's okay because there are thousands of other people that are also supporting that network. So it kind of constrains those sorts of risks. So another thing is, if your application is storing stuff that is changing all the time, so I don't know, let's say, for example, your application records somebody's favorite color, right? And they change their minds all the time. A blockchain would not necessarily be the best way to store that. But if you want to store that someone changed their mind about this color, that is an event that you can capture and restore in a permanent record. So it's a historical record, basically, of information. So blockchains are really good at storing historical data like that. And of course, that's a very, contrived example, but, you can extend that to much more complex data. And the thing about history is just another way of saying a sequence of events that has happened, cause and effect. So in a blockchain, you can inspect all the things that have happened from the very beginning to current on that network. And that's one of the things that makes a blockchain useful. It's kind of like having raw visibility into, I don't know, like a SQL database transaction log, except you can actually query that directly. Another thing here is the authentication on a blockchain. Harish mentioned security earlier. Well, security has three properties. It involves authenticity, which is I am who I say I am. Integrity, which is this data is the same as when I wrote it, like you're reading exactly what I wrote. And confidentiality, which is whenever I send data to you, you're the only one that can read it, nobody else. So in a blockchain, the bring your own authentication using cryptography satisfies the authentication part of it, the I am who I say I am. And the fact that each block is, if you can visualize stacked on top of the other one, well, the thing that kind of glues those blocks together is a cryptographic hash. And so that helps with integrity, making sure that no block can be changed once another one is stacked on top of it. And the confidentiality aspect, some blockchains have claimed to solve for that, but blockchain as a whole doesn't strive to solve the confidentiality problem. It's kind of in conflict with the transparency aspect of it, of being able to inspect everything that's happened. There are some that are going down that path, but we're focusing here on the ones that haven't solved that yet, because it is still a very early technology. And the final point on here is that the network is self-governing. And I kind of touched on this earlier in that, as a developer or as a user, you don't have to trust individuals operating the network. You're trusting the technology itself to do the right thing. And so that's what we're talking about here. A blockchain is at its core, it is a way for lots and lots and lots of people to work together, even though they don't trust each other. So blockchain is a solution to kind of that problem. And so that's the core of the technology that builds that trust in the platform itself, even if you don't trust any of the individuals behind it.
So Devin had mentioned this when he gave his intro, but he's our Chief Technology Officer and he is our cryptography expert. And I'm sure we will have future webinars where we'll definitely do some more deeper dives into this. And it's a topic that I know Devin loves. So thank you for that input, Devin. Okay, so let's take a quick look at smart contracts. And unfortunately, in the blockchain world, I mean, it's probably no different than most other spaces as well, but it is a loaded term to some extent. And so in this webinar here, our goal is just to focus on its literal definition in the context of blockchain technology. And effectively, that is smart contracts are just computer code which validate if a blockchain transaction should be approved or rejected. And there's obviously all sorts of conversations and rabbit holes essentially that one can go down around if these smart contracts are parallel to actual contracts and enforceability. But we're going to park that for now, and that's definitely a food for a separate conversation. So maybe just with a quick show of hands here in the Zoom app, how many of you are familiar with CryptoKitties? Okay, so it looks like a bit of a mixed reaction here. So Let's start with this application. In fact, it was one of the most popular applications by far on Ethereum, that particular blockchain, in sort of late 2017 and 2018. But the CryptoKitties application, let me just pull up the actual website here, is a decentralized app, so a DApp, where you can buy and sell digital cats. You can breed digital cats, and you can obviously trade digital cats with other users. And so this was actually a really interesting application to engage the broader population that was just getting introduced to the concept of decentralized apps running on blockchain. And the underlying contract essentially that runs this DApp looks something like this. You can actually see it on a tool like Etherscan, which is an Ethereum block explorer. And what they've done here is they basically allow you to interact with the CryptoKitties contract. So you can see things like obviously the name of the contract, the total supply of kittens that have been created, the number of cats that are pregnant, and you can also interact with this contract. So, for example, if you had some sort of CryptoKitty ID, you can query it to actually see if it's pregnant or not. And so this is obviously a fairly detailed contract, but it's actually not very complicated in terms of what can be done. I'd highly recommend for folks that are interested to spend a little bit of time on Etherscan to take a look, not only at the CryptoKitties contracts, but even other contracts. There's a lot of interesting information that you can find about these smart contracts. So this is just an example of a fairly popular application running off of a smart contract. And again, the smart contract just being sort of a validating set of code to determine if a transaction should be recorded or not recorded on the blockchain.
Yeah, and if you've ever done any programming, you might look at this and think, oh, this just looks like a bunch of functions that I might call in my program. And you'd be exactly right. A smart contract is like a program that is always running. Like when you deploy a contract, it's running. It's like a program that's running. And then after it gets started, you can just call functions on it whenever you want. Some of them might change the state and some of them might just read from it. But that's all we're doing with this contract here. We're just calling functions on a program, and that program is called CryptoKitties.
So one more point here to note. So different blockchain projects have got different programming languages that one can use to program smart contracts. For Ethereum in particular, the language that's used is called Solidity. It's very similar to JavaScript, if any of you are familiar with that programming language. And Ethereum is one of the more popular, if not the most popular programmable blockchain currently. And so smart contracts written with Solidity are quite popular at the moment. Another example to take a look at that was also part of the conversation in our previous webinar is basically the contract to create your own ERC20 token. And ERC20 just refers to a standard for a custom token created on the Ethereum blockchain. And so if we actually take a look at the Ethereum wiki here and the ERC20 token standard, we see that the contract interface looks something like this, where these would be the functions, for example, that you would be required to incorporate into your token if it is to meet the ERC20 standard. Along with some attributes such as the name of the token, the symbol, the number of decimal places. And so here's again, just another example of what a Solidity contract for creating your own ERC20 token sort of has in terms of key functions and attributes. And again, folks would take this contract, they would adapt it for their particular token, and then deploy that contract, which would be managing the supply transfer of their particular token. The last example to highlight here before we move on is a very simple ownership contract. And so all this is showing here is that there is a mapping between some string and some Ethereum address in a variable called owner of, and that owner of mapping just stores some sort of asset name with the address of whoever owns it. And we'll actually see a demo of this particular contract being used. But this is just, again, a very, very simple ownership example of a smart contract that that can be used to record the ownership of a particular asset. So we've talked a little bit about smart contracts and looked at a few examples of them. But let's take a quick look at what are some of the current challenges for both developers and end users with blockchain development. So if you've done any dApp development or used a blockchain dApp, you're probably familiar with some of the pain points and the sort of very, very complex process that's highlighted here. So everything from having to go and install a web wallet, a browser wallet like MetaMask, to having to acquire Ether from an external exchange, and then having to transfer that through to your MetaMask wallet in order to be able to actually even interact with the dApp. There's a lot of moving pieces here, and so the friction for actually getting started and using a dApp is quite high. Let's just actually take a look at what this process looks like for a user. So if I go to the dApp radar rankings for Ethereum, I just want to see the type of applications there. And I'm going to take a look at this one here, my Crypto Heroes, which seems to be currently the most popular dApp on Ethereum in terms of daily active users. And so if I visit this this project as an end user, the first thing that I get prompted for is this request to access my MetaMask account. And so if I don't even have a browser wallet, then, I mean, this is what my experience looks like here. And so I don't even see a bunch of the information if I don't have a browser wallet. If I were to put in my credentials, if I do have a browser wallet, so let's just do that. I'm prompted with this connection request of this game wanting to connect to my account that may or may not contain some crypto, and this is the first interaction that I have with this particular website, and so taking a look at this as an end user who's maybe sort of new to this whole crypto space, I'm almost immediately sort of turned away from this because now there's this third party trying to access my account. I don't know what information or how much information they're going to access, but this is sort of the experience for the current end user interacting with the dApp at the moment. And it's not sort of the most sort of comforting, if you will, for any end user.
Yeah, and I mean, you might have noticed in the fine print of that prompt just now, it said, make sure that you trust all the sites you interact with. This is the first time we've ever been to this site. Of course, I don't trust it yet. So, it's actually unreasonable to ask that of a user before they even have had a chance to interact with a site. And that's just a fundamental security problem. And it's not limited just to the blockchain space either. We see this across the software industry as well. Like, permissions are a very difficult thing to get right from a user experience point of view, but also from a security point of view, like, so to speak, and users want to get access to things like my Crypto Heroes. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of point out that trust issue there when we just talked about one of the benefits of being you don't have to trust an individual. This introduces a point where you actually do.
So we saw that sort of experience for the end user. For developers, it's really not that much different in terms of the process of having to go and acquire some of the blockchain's native or utility token, and then having to set up a browser wallet. And then for developers in particular, having to use sort of customize sometimes large complex libraries like Web3 to incorporate that sort of package and that configuration and code into your code repository. And so again, if you think of the focus for developers on delivering end value to their users, there's a lot of time spent on sort of this infrastructure and setup processes that require a lot of time, require a lot of steps, and don't at the end of the day deliver end value to your customers.
So I can make an analogy here, both on the user experience side and on the developer side. I mean, there's a lot of steps either way you look at it. You know, you can think of this in the same way as you think of the VR industry, right? Like the early adopters of virtual reality technology are the people that are really enthusiastic about it, and they're willing to invest the time and effort into it. But as a result, you know, the general population might be intrigued by virtual reality and interested in it, but they might not venture out to purchase and use it themselves because of the difficulty and the friction in getting into that space, whether it be expensive or just technically difficult to achieve. It's the same thing is true in the blockchain space. It's still in the stage where usability hasn't really been addressed particularly well yet. So you have to be really interested and excited about what you're doing in order to go through all of this trouble, either as a user or a developer, to use something that's blockchain enabled.
So another thing I just wanted to point out here is taking a look at you know, a website that sort of tracks applications on various blockchains. We're looking at Ethereum here. Have a look at the number of active users in the past sort of 24 hours, and we sort of see that, you know, once you get past the top 10 here, you know, it's less than 400 active users every 24 hours. And so what this kind of points out is that you know, there might be sort of an initial interest and intrigue with these applications, but there seems to be an adoption and a retention issue, especially when you compare that with non blockchain centralized solutions like Android or iOS apps. And so, as sort of mentioned, this is, you know, blockchain and dApps are still at a very early stage here, and you know, there'll definitely be a bunch of iterations, improvements before we start to see you know, dApps become much more mainstream than they currently are, and sort of have higher adoption and retention numbers. So this slide's pretty interesting in terms of just highlighting the number of smart contracts that have deployed, looking at it sort of on a quarterly basis over the past few years, and the fact that, you know, while there is this growth in the number of contracts that are deployed, there's still this fact that the vast majority of smart contracts aren't called very often, and so, you know, despite the fact that you sort of see this growth between 2017 and 2018, 2019, you know, over almost 95% are called fewer than 10 times. And so again, this might sort of indicate that there is some structural impediments to having this growth and adoption and usage of smart contracts, in terms of being able to extract value in sort of an easy manner. And that's really, you know, one of the areas that we at Blockmason are trying to focus on with an application like Link that we're going to get into in just a second. So in a survey of about 2,000 developers done last year, trying to get a sense from them in terms of their level of optimism and interest in blockchain technology. And so the vast majority still had a very positive view, and over 2/3 didn't think that blockchain was overrated. About half are learning blockchain development for their own personal interest, and almost 50% also for their future professional development. There were about 10% of survey respondents who said they're not interested in blockchain, and so some of the reasons that we saw why were everything from it still being early days to determining if blockchain even has a use, to the fact that there's still a lot of scams out there that involve crypto tokens, and so there is that element to be mindful of, and potentially even some lack of practical use cases currently. So we still see that there is this level of optimism, and there is this interest from developers to use blockchain. And as mentioned, we're still sort of at this early stage as users and developers alike sort of determine the best approach for incorporating this new technology either into an existing application or into a new application that they develop. Okay, so let's quickly look at Link by Blockmason and what it is. And at a high level, Link is essentially just a functions as a service platform, which is really pushing the envelope of interoperability by creating conventional web APIs for developers interacting with different networks, such as programmable blockchains. So effectively, as we saw the functions in smart contracts, what this means from the perspective of using an application like Link is that Link allows you to interact and engage with those smart contract functions as you would with any third-party service by just using web APIs, RESTful APIs. The goal for Link is to empower developers to focus on, the more creative and innovative projects and help them get their ideas and prototypes to market as quickly as possible. And really, what we're trying to drive here is opening up the population of users to the growing world of decentralized applications and expanding beyond sort of this early pool of early adopters that have been primarily the ones utilizing blockchain tech.
Yeah, I mean, the goal is for blockchain to just kind of slip behind the scenes where people don't even know it's there. It's completely transparent. Because why should an end user have to know about some technology decision you made for your servers? And we want to make things easier for developers too. So we're super excited about being able to do that, because blockchain is certainly a space that's in need of, as we kind of touched on earlier and as Harris just mentioned, that we have a usability problem and we have an adoption problem in the blockchain industry. So let's make that better.
Taking a look at just some of the benefits that Link has to offer. I mentioned a few of these. I'm not going to go through each of them in detail here. But again, the focus here is that Link sort of manages this backend infrastructure and sort of all these processes that exist currently to interact with a technology like blockchain. And so the goal, again, being for us to try to facilitate and work with developers so that they're focused on building their applications and delivering value to their end users, and sort of abstracting away this complexity that exists when you use a new tech like blockchain. This is just to highlight some of the blockchain projects that we currently support. You're the first to hear about this with our recent integration with the Go chain, which is a highly scalable, low-cost blockchain protocol. It's 100% Ethereum compatible. It boasts up to 1,300 transactions per second, and offers transaction fees that are up to 7,500 times cheaper than Ethereum. So this is the first time we're announcing it, and we will be making a more formal announcement to our community, but we're really excited to be able to include such a high performant blockchain into Link. So let's actually take a look at a demo of how to go about creating and deploying a smart contract, and we'll go back and utilize the ownership smart contract that we took a look at the beginning of this presentation. Um, I do want to point out here, so just for some quick reference, this is the blockmason.link website. And we have now got a page here where we mention the different SDKs that we currently offer for Link. So if you are familiar with JavaScript or Java or .NET, we currently have SDKs in place that make it extremely easy to go about using Link into your projects. And so here's an example of the Node package manager Link SDK for JavaScript. You can use Yarn or npm to install that. So let's actually take a look at what this looks like in practice. And so logging into Blockmason Link, this is what you encounter. You've got your IDE here, and in real time, as you're adding your smart contract code, it's being deployed to the Link private blockchain or Link private network. And so there's this toggle here where you can actually jump between the code and the underlying APIs that are being generated in real time. And so this is obviously a very simple example where we've got a very basic function called hello world, and all it does is return a piece of string. The API endpoint here is this get request made to the hello world endpoint, and we should expect to get back a string. So if I were actually coding up my script to be able to interact with this particular API, it might look something like this that I've got in my code editor. So because we are using fetch, we need to require a node fetch, and then it's simply requiring the Link SDK that was mentioned. There is sort of an authorization here with a client ID and client secret, and we'll look at that in just a second. But all we're doing is calling this async function get message, where we're going to call this API endpoint and then log out the message that we're seeing, and we're doing this with Node. And so if you take a look at the bottom here, this is effectively how your code authenticates and interacts with the API. This is the client ID that is utilized, and the client secret to be able to have your body of code interact with this API. Just making sure that looks correct with the client ID and the client secret that I use. And then let's just see if this gives us what we would expect. Okay, so we see the hello world string get returned. So all we're doing here again is making this API call to this endpoint. In Link at the very bottom here, there is the ability to look at all the events that are being called, and we see that just a little while ago here that we called the hello world endpoint. And so it's that simple. You're just making API calls to interact with your smart contract. So this is, again, a very, very basic example. Let's take a look at something, maybe a little bit more detailed. And that's that ownership contract that we looked at earlier, where effectively it's just a mapping between some asset name that's a string and an owner, which is an address. So let's just copy and paste this. And this is being deployed in real time to our the Link private network. And it'll just take a second here, but when it does, you'll see the client ID and the client secret update. And obviously that's because this is being deployed in real time to the blockchain, and what gets deployed to the blockchain is immutable and remains there this is effectively a brand new deployment, and to interact with this particular contract, we've got a different set of authentication here. If I take a look at, again, the API, now I see that I've got a few different API endpoints. I can post to set the owner by passing the string and the address. I can get an owner of a particular asset by passing the string, the asset string name. And there's also this concept of authority in terms of who owns the contract. But again, really, really simple, and in real time, I'm able to convert and sort of translate these functions in Solidity code into just RESTful web APIs. And so if I wanted to interact now with the smart contract and these APIs, an example piece of code might look something like this, where again, I require the node fetch and the Blockmason SDK. I'll have to make sure that I'm using the right client ID and the client secret here. But all I'm going to do is set the owner for some assets, so some painting, and an Ethereum-based address for that owner. And then I'm going to retrieve the ownership of the particular asset. So that's going to be the value that I pass. And hopefully what I get back is this address of the owner. So we're basically just working with both sets of API endpoints, the set owner and the get owner. And so here's the client ID that we have for this particular contract. So let's just copy that and use this here. Let's save that, and let's run this now. Okay, so we see that the set ownership was successful, and the result of the owner address here that we just console logged is actually the address that we initially set. So again, a little bit more complicated smart contract with a few more details, but again, very easy from an application point of view to interact with the smart contract by simply just making a few API calls to set the owner and get the owner. And so what this allows you to do, if you sort of think a little bit more abstract here, the fact that Link allows you to interact with multiple blockchains. As a developer, you're no longer sort of restricted to pick a particular blockchain project to build or incorporate into either an existing application or a new application. You can effectively pick and choose the features that you might want from different blockchain projects and be able to incorporate multiple networks into your application. So let's say in this case here, where I'm assigning the ownership of an asset, I might want to use a very high throughput, maybe even a private blockchain. So I would use something like the Link private network to be able to record the ownership of an asset. But maybe my app also requires a payment for acquiring that asset, and I want that payment transaction to be made public. I can maybe use the Ethereum blockchain to be able to publish, what transactions happened, how much was paid for the asset. So I can kind of pick and choose the features that I want, as opposed to being locked into a particular type of network that I would be forced to use if I was working directly with a tool like Web3.js, for example. So the last thing I want to show you here is just what an end user experience looks like working with a decentralized application that isn't sort of your typical dApp experience. And so what I'm going to do is just bring up a sample dApp that we've got here. So this is just a collectible stamps dApp that I'm running on just my local machine here. And here all I'm doing is being able to assign ownership of a particular stamp or image or whatever you want to call this. And I can effectively just do this by passing in the information that I want. Oh, looks like I just need to make sure I I got to authenticate here. But in this case here, I'm not working with Web3.js. I'm not being prompted by MetaMask to be able to interact directly and connect with my browser wallet before I can do anything. You can think of this experience being similar to a service where maybe the end user pays with a credit card, for example, and then gets to interact with your application. And behind the scenes, things might be leveraging blockchain, and you've got your own crypto token being used for the payment. But from an end user's perspective, they don't care about any of that complexity. They just want something that's easy, intuitive to use, and sort of be as frictionless as possible. And so that's what Link allows you to do, is provide these experiences where you're not dealing with all those friction points that we've talked about a few times in this webinar. So I think that's all I wanted to show you here. At this point, let's open it up for any questions, and you can do that by raising your hand, and then we'll unmute you and have you ask your question. Okay, Ryan, I've got you unmuted here.
Okay, so I wanted to find out, how would I go about best about showing a group of kids how they can use Link to create a smart contract and tie that into maybe a JavaScript, an HTML web page. What would be the easiest way to do that, or to make that connection for a group of kids and show them how to do that on their own?
Yeah, so we've actually on our website here. Let me see if I can pull this up very quickly. We've actually got a series of demos that we've been building out. So, for example, we've got one here where we kind of went through this in the webinar itself, but it basically walks you through step by step on how to create your own ERC20 token. There's actually also another one similar to what I was just talking about here, where you can create a very basic ownership, a stamp ownership application on the front end and interact with Link on the back end. And we use the very simple ownership contract that we were just showing you there. So that's sort of a nice, easy way to sort of present the technology in a relatively clean and easy way.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I'll definitely be using that. But is there do you know if this works with a tool like CodePen?
With a tool like CodePen, did you ask?
Yes.
Let me just double check this. Is CodePen like a...
It's like a online coding environment where you can kind of like prototype and or teach,
right.
Inspire, etc.
Right. So right now, I mean, you could use a tool like CodePen to, I'm not sure if you can actually code in Solidity, for example, or build smart contracts there. Maybe you can. I'm not super familiar with it. But if you wanted to use a tool like that to build a smart contract, just like you could use a tool like Remix that's currently out in the marketplace, then you can use that to build your smart contract code. And then all you would do is copy and paste that code into Link, and then you've got your APIs to actually interact with it. So that might be a good tool to build a contract, make sure it doesn't have any bugs, make sure it's set up correctly, and then use a tool like Link to convert the functions of the smart contracts into API endpoints that you can then call in your front end app.
Yeah,
okay,
I'll chime in a little bit on that as well. So I haven't used CodePen yet, but after looking at it, I think I might want to. And from what I can tell, it's for front end web developers, right? You can do HTML, JavaScript, CSS. So Link, all you're really building in Link, and as Harris is showing on the screen right now, is just a web API. And
Right.
so you can build the client for that API in CodePen, and you can build your smart contract in Link directly if you want. So I don't see why you shouldn't be able to use CodePen for this. But thanks for calling our attention to that, because I'd be very interested in putting something on there myself. Using Link, because it looks like that's a pretty cool community to get involved in.
Right. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Let's see here. We've got Rick. I'm just going to mute you now. Rick, go ahead.
Hello. I'm glad Ryan brought up that point because I am currently under 18 now. I am pursuing a career in cybersecurity. In which way can I implement cryptography? Of course, here more specifically, Link, the app I'm seeing now. In which way is it possible, first of all, for me to incorporate that some way into any way possible actually into cybersecurity in terms of securing transactions, perhaps say in a bank?
Yeah, I can chime in on that a little bit. For very sensitive data, I would definitely recommend, when working with any blockchain technology, whether it's through Link or otherwise, that you have a cryptography layer on top of the raw data, such as bank transaction data, for example. Anything that's really sensitive, you'll definitely want a layer of cryptography on top of that. And that can either be written directly into your contract with Solidity, or you can implement that and then just feed Solidity the ciphertext of that sensitive data. But yeah, I probably wouldn't be able to answer your question fully, right now. But yeah, the key point I would want to get across in cybersecurity, and if you're looking to protect data, then you would absolutely want to have a cryptography layer on top of blockchain and treat it like you would any other database.
All right.
Maybe just one more point there, Rick. Have a look at a project called Oasis Labs. And the reason I mentioned that is they've sort of taken a security first approach to building out their platform that is supposedly Ethereum compatible, so you can build smart contracts. But they also add in maybe a few more features or elements of security that you wouldn't find with just the regular Ethereum project. So something to have a look at.
All right then. Follow-up question. Is this app in particular, is it specific to Ethereum, or can it be incorporated? Is it currently incorporated, or can it be incorporated into any other cryptocurrency?
So you can. Devin, did you want to go?
Oh, I was just going to briefly note that it's currently we're targeting Ethereum and anything that's Ethereum compatible, which is pretty much anything that accepts Solidity as a programming language, or that uses the Ethereum virtual machine, the EVM. So that's what we're currently targeting. However, as a platform, the direction we're going is absolutely to be more open-ended and generic, but the only requirement is that whatever the platform is, it support application development. So like, for example, Bitcoin is not a good fit for Link as a backend, because Bitcoin is not a software development platform. It's actually just a value store tool. And so you can associate data with transactions, but you can't have anything beyond, colored coins, as an example. Yet, maybe it will in the future, but Ethereum is unique amongst the earlier blockchains in that it, in the very beginning, it was kind of designed with that sort of development platform in mind. And other blockchains, there's a lot more out there right now that support things like WebAssembly, and we're very excited to integrate with those in the future, which opens the door to so many other programming languages. So So yeah, the short answer is just Ethereum compatible networks for now. But in the future, we're definitely looking to be portable across other blockchain application development platforms and even things that aren't blockchain at all eventually.
All right. So, sorry to ramble on. Just um, eventually, like you said, you're trying to pursue incorporating blockchain into almost like everyday applications, like essentially cutting out the middleman and like even I saw an example previously in the webinar of applications that are more centralized but don't use link or any blockchain algorithm. You're saying that eventually trying to pursue incorporating blockchain into everyday apps, and not necessarily non um, cryptocurrencies, but just everyday apps in general.
Oh, absolutely. That's hitting the nail on the head right there. We think of blockchain as an application development platform, and cryptocurrency is one of the many things that you can do with a platform like that. And so by thinking of it as an application development platform, we start to enable use cases beyond just the financial technology industry, use cases far beyond cryptocurrency, where we see it as just a generic platform, just like a web browser or JavaScript or just anything else that you can just build any software on. So I mean, you could go to Google tomorrow and it's using a blockchain under the hood. Now that's not real, that's not true, but what I'm saying is it'll be transparent, and that's what we're looking to enable. In fact, Link is not a great use case for financial use cases that directly involve transferring Ethereum back and forth, or anything that's like a blockchain native currency. It's not very useful for that, because at the end of the day, a lot of what we're able to achieve, we do so through managing the authentication to the blockchain network for you. So we're kind of abstracting those two things out, but maybe that's a little too in the weeds for now.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for your question, Rick. So we're almost at time here, so we're happy to stick around a little bit if folks have any additional questions. But just wanted to thank you all for attending this. We do have this very quick poll to provide us with some very quick feedback on this webinar. So would really appreciate if you just took literally 20 to 30 seconds here of your time just to fill that out for us, so that we can better tailor our future webinars. And so just a couple of things here. You can feel free to follow along with some of our development on Twitter, Reddit, and Telegram. We are also shortly launching our developer community, developer channel, I should say, on Slack. Yeah, look forward to that if you're interested in working with us as sort of a beta tester. We'd love to be interacting with some of our end users a little bit more, and to get their much appreciated feedback. So thank you.
Looks like we might have another question from Ryan.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, awesome. Can you just go back to your slide on why use Link again? And then maybe with the free time, if you guys are all done and just hanging around, explain a little more in depth, why use Link, how does it help me, and what's the advantages to using Link to deploy on the Ethereum blockchain?
All really good questions. I know maybe Devin, if you want to kick that one off really quickly.
Oh, thank you.
You teed it up for him.
Yeah, that's right. I guess the value proposition is a lot more clear whenever you try and create a distributed or a decentralized application without using Link. And there's another slide that kind of goes through a lot of the difficulty in getting started down that path. But I'll try to summarize. So the end user experience, if you're interacting with something that requires for you to already have a cryptocurrency wallet, that in itself is, it rules out anybody who doesn't have a crypto wallet already. And right now that's the majority of people.
Right.
So if you're trying to build an application that is not cryptocurrency related, like you don't really care about coins changing hands, you just want to build a piece of software, you want to build a game or an email access tool, or whatever. We build all sorts of software. So if you just want to build something, blockchain right now without Link would not even be a viable option for you, because your end users, you can't expect them to suffer through that. Again, if you have a crypto wallet, it's because you're interested in the crypto industry. And so we don't want to limit developers to building things only for people that are already in the crypto space. So with Link, you remove that requirement from end users. They don't need to have a wallet. They don't need to be invested in crypto already to use your product or your software. They can just use your Link project, and that kind of abstracts that away from them, which goes to what I said earlier about Link is, at the end of the day, it's a managed wallet provider that is proxying between your end user and the blockchain itself. So they don't need to bring their own wallet, which is also the reason why I say it's not particularly well suited for financial use cases where you're actually transferring ETH from wallet to wallet. We're targeting the broader scope of software beyond that. Another thing is, most people that are writing software, and most software that gets written, sure, there's a lot of it that's hobbyist, but a lot of it is commercial. A lot of most developers are employed by someone, right? And so most of what we build is commercial in some way or another. And what I'm trying to get at with that is we've already built this software. We already have a company. We already have this set of tools that we use, and so it's not even on the table to consider blockchain as a technology choice for anything that's already there. Your users already have a login page, right? They already have solutions for all these things. So in order to use blockchain right now, you kind of have to buy into it wholesale. You have to change the entire paradigm and start from scratch and build a brand new thing. And that's just the nature of the beast if you're looking at blockchain and decentralized application technology. But with Link,
Right.
because what you end up with is a web API, that's probably it's probably very similar to what you're already using in your app, and there's no impact to your end user. Your server can map the users who have logged in to entities within your your Link project. So you already have an existing application. You can sprinkle in blockchain and seamlessly tether the authentication that's already there, the stuff that you've already built, and sprinkle something in there that happens to involve blockchain without creating any additional friction for developers or users.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. I could go on for hours, but I'll stop there.
Yeah. No, I think that really explains it very well, particularly when you state that, for non-blockchain users or people that aren't concerned about transferring coins, being able to just build, for example, a web app, but actually be able to host it on a blockchain or build a smart contract or build a web app and tie it into a smart contract without all the complexities and all of the friction that's involved in having a wallet and that sort of thing for regular users. I think that really says it there.
Awesome.
That's great feedback. Thank you. Any other questions? And if you haven't had a chance to complete the short poll, really appreciate if you were to just give us your quick feedback on the webinar today.
Another thing I wanted to interject before we leave is we recently spun up a developer community on Slack. So if you'd like to join that, if you get involved in Link and you want support or to kind of get involved in a community of other people that are using this product or just in the blockchain space in general, please feel free to join our developer community on Slack, and we'd love to see you there.
Awesome. Well, if there aren't any more questions, we'll park it there. So thank you again so much for taking the time to attend this this webinar. There will be, so we did record this, and there will be a recording copy that will be provided. I will be touching base with Alina from CryptoKitties, and I'll get a link out to you. And if you look in our Zoom chat group there, Clayton just posted the link to our developer community. So as Devin mentioned, if you are interested, please feel free to join that community and interact with other Link developers. And with that, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day, wherever you may be.